I'm doing something very brave, something that takes a lot of guts. I'm going to come out and I'm going to have an opinion. And like most opinions, this opinion could be wrong. But at the end of the day, it's my job to get out there and say what's on my chest. And this is what's in my chest, in my heart, is that these fantasy football players are going to be either the greatest thing you've ever seen in your life or the worst thing you've ever seen in your life. Today, I'm going to be talking about 4 players who are my guys. 4 players who I am super in on, more than I think the general public and the general consensus. Guys who I'm reaching on during my fantasy mock drafts because I just want to ensure that they are on my fantasy team. And then I'm also going to be talking about 4 guys who I am fading, possibly beyond what you might expect. Guys who I'm not taking unless they fall significantly past where you would expect them to go. And these aren't the guys I'm going to be talking about today. These aren't going to be, obviously good guys or guys who are obviously bad picks. We're not talking about Tony Pollard here. I'm not telling you not to draft Tony Pollard because he's a low upside running back. We all know Tony Pollard's a low upside running back. I'm going to be talking about guys who you might not expect to be as bad as they may be, or guys that you might not expect to be as good as I think they're going to be. So I'm going to be staking some claims today. I'm going to be going, balls to the walls. These are my guys, planting my flag. And if I'm wrong, this isn't legal advice and you should take this with a grain of salt. Without further ado, let's get into it. First guy we are smashing the draft button on come draft day is Kenneth Walker. I think Kenneth Walker is being criminally undervalued coming into this season because people are still stuck in a funk of who he was on the Seahawks. On the Seahawks, Kenneth Walker was an inconsistent running back who was plagued by ticky-tack injuries, never really separated himself out from Zach Charbonnet, who repeatedly cucked him on the goal line. And overall, he was a guy who every year we came in with these expectations of he's going to be the number one guy. He's going to average 15, 16 points per game. He deserves to be a 4th, 3rd round pick, and he just wasn't that guy, and he was always falling under his draft position. But coming into this year on the Chiefs, I think you have to step away from what we saw on the Seahawks and look at the situation he's stepping into. The Chiefs over the last 2 years have been consistently with the bottom feeding teams when it comes to rushing. They have struggled to put up double-digit rushing touchdowns in terms of the running backs. They've averaged just over 4.4 yards a carry. They are bottom in the league in explosive run rate, and they recognize that that was an issue, that their offense was being limited because their run game struggled so much. So who did they go out and get? They went out and got Kenneth Walker. And it's not like they got Kenneth Walker plus some other guy. No, they just got Kenneth Walker. They believe that Kenneth Walker will be able to fix their run game. And I think that he's stepping into a role where he is going to be the bell cow running back on the Kansas City Chiefs offense. And when you look at this offense as a whole, I think that there's a very high chance that this offense runs through Kenneth Walker this season. Patrick Mahomes is coming off an ACL injury. He's not going to want to be scooting around, at least for the first month and a half, I think, like he did at the start of last season, where he was essentially the run game. I don't think he's going to be that mobile. I think he's going to want to hand off the ball to Kenneth Walker. You look at the receiving core on Kansas City. It's not bad, but it's not the Cincinnati Bengals. You've got Rashee Rice, geriatric Travis Kelce, and Xavier Worthy's a fun player, but I don't think he's terribly good. He's more of a gadget guy. So I think that Kenneth Walker may legitimately be the best skill player on the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't understand why he's ranked all the way down at running back 11, 28th overall, when he may be a bona fide bell cow back. You look at some of the guys ahead of him, Ashton Jeanty, bell cow back, but he's on the Raiders. Saquon Barkley seems to be maybe losing some work to Tank Bigsby this season. And Amarian Hampton, who Mike McDonald already came out and said is going to be splitting reps with Keaton Mitchell and Kamani Vidal. Kenneth Walker being the back of the 2nd round pick is absurd. I think he should be taken up at the top of the second around the 1-2 turn, because I think his role is just going to be so juicy and Kansas City is going to rely on him so much that he may legitimately get 20 plus touches a game. And I don't think it's crazy to say that if he plays all 17 games, which is an issue, I will admit that he has had ticky-tack injuries through his career, missed, 2 games here, a game here. But if he plays all 17 games, I legitimately think he could finish as a top 5 running back just because of the opportunity he's going to have at Kansas City and the situation he's stepping into. So I am definitely willing to reach on Kenneth Walker, or if you get him at ADP, I think he is a massive steal. So we are absolutely grabbing up Kenneth Walker whenever we get the chance. The first guy we're going to fade, and this pains me a lot to say it, but we're fading Justin Jefferson this year. And it's because I don't think the quarterback situation in Minnesota has changed enough to where Justin Jefferson is going to be a good pick at his value. And that's ultimately one of my problems with Justin Jefferson is he's currently wide receiver 6th. I don't think he makes it out of the first round in your home league, in your friend league, in an office league, because he's Justin Jefferson, because everyone knows who Justin Jefferson is. And if the options for Justin Jefferson are either first round or not at all, I'm taking not at all, because you look at the quarterback situation this year, and I know they bring in Kyler Murray. They just gave him the starting job for week 1. I don't know if Kyler is significantly good enough to propel Justin Jefferson to being a first-round wide receiver. When you're a first-round wide receiver and you're expected to go in the top 6, you really need to, looking back over the last couple of years, you really need 1,300 or 1,400 yards and double-digit touchdowns a lot of the time to be a top 5 wide receiver. And I just don't know if Kyler Murray is able to produce that if he starts the entire season. And that's a big if even then, because we could see J.J. McCarthy come back in at some point as a guy who they spent top 12 draft capital on in 2024. But going back to Kyler Murray, you look at what he's done the last 3 years in Arizona. Last year, in terms of passing, really bad. Averaged less than 200 passing yards a game. 2 years before that, 226 and 224. Assuming Kyler goes back to what he was during his past years in Arizona and starts averaging slightly above 200 passing yards a game, I'm just worried that the passing volume is not going to be enough to sustain Justin Jefferson to being a top 6 wide receiver, because he's in an offense where there are significant target competition for Justin Jefferson in this offense. Jordan Addison, while not great, is probably going to have 800, 900 yards. They bring in Juwan Jennings, probably going to have a significant amount of yards. TJ Hawkinson, while a shell of his former self, still exists and still will probably catch the ball at some point during the season. So you're looking at a quarterback who doesn't produce a high volume of passing yards in an offense where is Justin Jefferson the clearest alpha? Absolutely. There are people behind him who are going to eat to some degree. And I just worry that his upside is not as much as the guys who are going around him. You look at the other wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb. Yes, he has to deal with George Pickens, but I think that Dak has shown the ability to produce enough for both of them to be successful, and I expect CeeDee Lamb to be better this year than he was last year without the injury. Drake London, going slightly after Justin Jefferson. He might have bad quarterbacks too, but at least he's the only viable option in that passing game. You look at the guys behind Drake London, Kyle Pitts, not good. And then it's just a gaggle of receivers, Jahan Dotson, Zachariah Branch. I'm not scared of either of those guys. And all of this is not even talking about the running backs who are going at the back half of the first round with Justin Jefferson. You're looking at Amarian Hampton, Saquon Barkley, Ashton Genty. These are high-value running backs who have high upside. And I just don't think Justin Jefferson provides that upside with Kyler Murray and his questionable passing attack. So we're fading Justin Jefferson unless he falls significantly, but I don't expect him to fall unless we're talking about, unless everybody in your league is super tuned in to, fantasy news and all that nonsense, because I think the name value alone will ensure that he's a first-round pick, and at a first-round value, I don't want Justin Jefferson. The second guy we're smashing the draft button on is Tucker Kraft. And this is just a case of tight end is just the worst. Like, I can't think of anything worse than having to figure out where you're going to draft a tight end in fantasy football. Tucker Kraft is really interesting because he's coming off of a really good tight end season where if he averaged 15 points per game over the entirety of the 2025 season, he would be a top 3 tight end. But he tore his ACL and he's coming back from the ACL. And that has people a little spooked, and people are a little nervous. Like, is he going to be ready for week 1? Signs appear to be pointing to yes, but he could miss the first 2 weeks. Is he going to be back to the 15 points per game form we saw? I don't know. But I think that you just, because he plays tight end, you have to take the swing on it. And you're looking at a guy who is a late round 6th pick, and he's in an offense that last year he showed that he was the number 1 target. Last year, he was the most consistent Green Bay Packers receiver for the first weeks he played. And he's coming back to an offense that has slimmed down the fat. Dontavian Wicks is gone. Romeo Doubs is gone. Yes, Christian Watson is back. And people are projecting a big breakout from Matthew Golden. But you got to remember that tight end is a different position who fills a different role in the offense. And I think that if Tucker Kraft comes back and he is even 80% of what he was pre-injury, he's going to be a very productive tight end. And he's really the last guy before you get to the tight end dead zone where I feel like he can very easily be a bona fide stud at the tight end position. After this, you start getting into guys like Sam Laporta, who struggles with target competition like we talked about, Kyle Pitts, who's just bad, and Dalton Kincaid, who's also just bad. So I think that in the 6th round, you got to take a swing on a guy who could be a top 4 tight end. He could beat out Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland for their tight end roles. And I definitely think he'll beat out Harold Fannin if he comes back good to go, who's ranked 1 spot ahead of him. So at the back of the end of the 6th round, like, obviously, you don't want to swing and miss on your 6th round pick, but in the 6th round, like, if you swing and miss, like, it's not the end of the world. It's not like the first 3 rounds where if you miss on your pick, you're kind of in a very big spot of trouble. But, like, you can miss on your 6th round pick and still be okay if you draft well. So I think because of the positional value and the opportunity in his offense and what we saw last year, I'm taking the swing on Tucker Kraft because if it hits, if he comes back and he's able to put up maybe not 15, but if he comes back and he puts up 12 points per game, and I have a tight end who's consistently outscoring my opponent, I'm feeling really good about that. So I think the risk is there, but I think it's not absurd risk, and I think it's risk that I'm willing to take on for the potential upside. So when it comes down to it, I'm smashing Tucker Kraft just because of the positional value he provides at the end of the day. Next guy we are fading is Jameson Williams, and it is simply because when he is on the field with Sam Laporta, he struggles. He struggled a lot. If you look at the first 8 games of the season, games where both Jameson Williams and Sam Laporta played the entirety of the game, Jameson Williams averaged 4.5 targets per game, 10.9 PPR points per game, and yes, he did have some spike weeks where he put up 15 plus points, but those were when he caught touchdowns. So he was very clearly a touchdown reliant, big play receiver who was not getting enough volume to be fantasy relevant. But then Sam Laporta gets hurt. And as soon as Sam Laporta gets hurt, all of a sudden Jameson Williams spikes up to 15.2 points per game, 7.4 targets a game, and he basically finishes out the season as a borderline wide receiver 1. And now coming into this season, seeing Jameson Williams as a 5th round pick, as a borderline wide receiver 2, I'm just scared of, is he going to be able to be a consistent fantasy starter once Sam Laporta back on the field? And if you look at what happened last year, the data says no. And yes, there is the argument to be made that perhaps Detroit could be more pass heavy with the loss of David Montgomery, meaning that they don't run the ball as much. However, I just struggle to be excited about a receiver who is fighting for the number 2 role with a tight end and is also clearly behind another alpha guy. Amon-Ra St. Brown has had at least 1,400 receiving yards for 3 straight seasons. And I just don't think that he's going to cede any of that work. So Jameson Williams and Sam LaPorta are very clearly fighting for what's left behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I just worry that he's going to be what he was at the beginning of last season, where he's a boom-bust, touchdown-reliant receiver who you never know whether he's going to drop less than 5 or more than 15. And I absolutely hate those guys because they're inconsistent. Yes, they win you weeks. They also lose you weeks. And when you look at the guys who are going around Jameson Williams, I think there's value to be had and more consistency around Jameson Williams. Right ahead of him is DJ Moore. DJ Moore has a lot lower upside. I think he's a lot less talented and a lot older than Jameson Williams, but he is the clear number 1 in a Buffalo Bills offense. Christian Watson, the clear number 1 receiver in a Green Bay Packers offense that's projected to be top 10 in points per game. DeAndre Swift, one of the last running backs who I think you can count on to have consistent snaps on every Sunday. David Montgomery, another one of the last running backs who I think you can count on to have a 3-down role. And Carnell Tate, an exciting rookie who projects to be the number 1 option in his offense. And you look at Jameson Williams, and I'm just like, he's a great football player, but I just don't know if he has the role to be a guy who is going to be a guy who you feel great about having in your roster week in and week out. So because of that, we're fading Jameson Williams just because I think that there is more consistent, more reliable value to be had than a guy who has shown that when all of his offense is on the field, he is not consistently getting targets, not consistently getting catches, and is not consistently providing fantasy value. Next guy we're drafting, Trevor Lawrence. QB9, I think that's just great value. You look at what Trevor Lawrence did last year. Finished as QB4, 19.9 points per game. Absolutely beautiful. However, I think a lot of people are discounting it because we had a Lamar Jackson injury, we had a Joe Burrow injury, we had a Jaden Daniels injury, and I think most people would expect that if those guys are healthy, they finish above Trevor Lawrence. So that's knocked his value down to QB9. However, I think that Trevor Lawrence might be undervalued. You look at what he did after the bye last year from Jacksonville, 23.3 points per game. That is an absurd amount of points for a quote-unquote pocket passing quarterback. And the reason he had that many points is he ballooned his totals with 7 rushing touchdowns, a number that we just haven't seen out of Trevor Lawrence more than ever in his career. So, but coming into this year, I think a lot of people are expecting that the rushing touchdowns will fall off. Like, that was a fluke. That was just a product of last season, and he's going to just go back to being a pure pocket passer. I don't know if that's the case. We saw a lot of questionable rushing out of quarterbacks in desperation last season. Patrick Mahomes was running for his life. Justin Herbert was running for his life. I think a lot of people expect those quarterbacks to not run as much this year. However, when it comes to Trevor Lawrence, I feasibly believe he could run as much as he did last year and score close to 10 rushing touchdowns on top of throwing 30 passing touchdowns again. He's in an offense that is run by Liam Cohen, a guy who I think is criminally undervalued as an offensive mind. I think he should be a strong contender for Coach of the Year this year. I think the Jags will probably have the best offense in the AFC South. And I think that Trevor Lawrence has plenty of weapons to throw the football to. So I think the passing numbers will be there. And I think the rushing numbers will also be there because you look at the running backs in Jacksonville, Travis Etienne has vacated a lot of rushing value, and they're counting on Bashal Tutin and Chris Rodriguez to pick up the slack. However, Chris Rodriguez has shown over the course of his career to be a purely short yardage running back and a goal line back. And Bashal Tutin, while he's a fun, hype player, has yet to show consistent production or the ability to produce at a high level in the National Football League. So there's a chance that these two running backs aren't able to fully absorb the rushing void left by Travis Etienne's departure. And that value could fall on Trevor Lawrence to make something happen with his legs in crunch situations. So I think there's a very high chance that Trevor Lawrence repeats his 8 rushing touchdowns from last season, while quarterbacks like Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes don't repeat their rushing production from last season. I think there's a very feasible chance Trevor Lawrence finishes as a top 6 quarterback through the combination of elite passing production and rushing production. I think the Jaguars will have an elite offense this season, and I think that at QB9, 76th overall, he has a super big value in terms of the production he could provide. And I think it's very feasible he averages another 20 points per game this upcoming season. Next guy we're fading, Rome Odunze, and this is purely a vibes-based fade. If you've been listening to what has been coming out of Bears training camp, listening to the coaching staff, listening to Ben Johnson talk about his offensive skill players, he talks about Luther Burden and Colston Loveland like they are God's gift to football. It is honestly homoerotic at times, the way he talks about Luther Burden and Colston Loveland. And that you hear him turn around and talk about Rome Odunze, and he goes, yeah, he's fine. Yeah, he's going to be out there. Yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing what he can do. Brother, it just seems like Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, guys who Ben Johnson went out and got in his first year as the Chicago Bears head coach, are his guys firmly and completely. And Rome Odunze, a guy who is a leftover from a previous coaching staff, a previous GM, is just kind of left to the wayside in Ben Johnson's plans, where he's probably going to be involved. I'd be surprised if their top 10 receiver that they took in the draft isn't involved, but I just don't know if it's going to be involved to the degree you want as a 5th round pick. So at wide receiver 29, it just seems like a bad process, because earlier in the season, I was like, Luther Burden is way too high. If I'm taking a Bears receiver, it's Rome Odunze, because I think they'll be very similar in production. The way Ben Johnson's talking about it, these two are not going to be near to each other in production. And yes, this could just be all coach speak. This could just be all camp buzz. It did come out that Luther Burden suffered a groin injury. It's questionable for week 1. So if he does miss time, that would be a good thing for Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze would presumably be more productive. But I'm just worried about the season-long outlook, though, because once Luther Burden comes back, it seems like Ben Johnson's plans do not terribly include Rome Odunze. And this is a Bears offense that, while a lot of people are excited for it and a lot of people project a high ceiling for it, Caleb Williams has still yet to throw 4,000 yards in a season. And if he doesn't take a jump and he remains at, 4,000 yards, maybe slightly under it, slightly under 30 touchdowns like he did last season, that's only going to be enough production for maybe 2 guys to be consistently fantasy relevant. And that's just not a good situation for the guy who seems to be the third man out. So if Caleb Williams doesn't take this step forward and there's only 1, maybe 2 spots for valuable fantasy assets, I think it goes, based on what we're hearing out of Bears training camp, Colston Loveland, Luther Burden, knocked down a spot because of his groin injury, and then Rome Odunze, who just seems to be Ben Johnson's antichrist. So I'm just not in on Rome Odunze. I think the upside is seemingly increasingly capped, and he's just a guy who I'm just going to stay away from. If it works out this year, we'll think about it next year. But for now, it seems like his job may be slipping through his fingers. The last guy we're smashing the draft button on is Chris Godwin. And this is purely just an upside draft case where you look at his current ADP of 78 overall. That's a 7th, 8th round pick. And this is just a good football player who has shown in the past the ability to be a good football player. In 2024, he was on pace to be a wide receiver 1 before getting injured, and then he missed the first part of last season being injured and was slow coming back. But coming into this season, he is over a year removed from his injury. He's in an offense that has shown the ability to be very productive. He is the clear, at bare minimum, wide receiver 2. I think he also has the possibility of maybe, if everything goes right, edging out Emeka Egbuka for potentially a wide receiver 1 role. And He's got a good quarterback in Baker Mayfield, who is in a contract year and is desperately trying to show the league that he deserves another long, very lucrative extension. I think he'll be trying to ball this season. And this is a cheap way to get involved with a Buccaneers offense that I think can very easily bounce back after an injury-plagued 2025. And he's cheap. He has, I think, decent upside. And if he blows, well, he's like a 7th, 8th round pick. It's not insurmountable loss of draft capital or waste of draft capital. So will he be, this bona fide stud we've seen in the past, especially in 2024? Unlikely. It's probably more likely Emeka Egbuka, the young, exciting player, takes a step forward and becomes the bona fide receiver, one. But could Emeka Egbuka have 1,400 yards and Chris Godwin also has 1,000 yards? Could Chris Godwin be, the T. Higgins to Emeka Egbuka's Ja'Marr Chase, with probably slightly lower outcomes for both of them compared to those two guys? Yeah, I think so. I think there's a very good chance that Chris Godwin, currently ranked as a wide receiver 3, finishes the year as a wide receiver 2, could very easily have 1,000 yards. And I think that he could very easily be a guy who is just sitting in your flex all year, providing value. And at the place he's going, compared to the guys around him, I think he's an absolute draft steal with a much higher potential outcome than the guys going around him. We're fading is RJ Harvey, just because I think he's overpriced. Last year, we saw kind of the complete circle of what RJ Harvey could be in the National Football League. First 10 games, he averages 10 points a game with J.K. Dobbins, plays only a fourth of the snaps, and is not that good of a rusher and is kind of just a designated passing down back. Then, J.K. Dobbins gets injured, RJ Harvey starts playing half of the snaps, starts averaging 15 points per game, and scores a bunch of touchdowns. Coming into this year, though, it seems like nothing's going to change. J.K. Dobbins is coming back. The Broncos gave him a non-insignificant amount of money. He seems to be the lead back, with RJ Harvey being a designated third down pass catching back. And if you look at what happened last year, that seems to be what RJ Harvey excels at. He was very bad at rushing. He averaged just 3.7 yards a carry. He only had 8 runs of 10 plus yards, but he was 8th in the league in pass catching. He was 8th in the league in targets, and he showed a lot of efficiency as a pass catching back. So coming into this year, I think that RJ Harvey's value is at, that should be running back 32. At running back 32 is based on the idea that he's going to be mid, he might be bad, but if J.K. Dobbins dies, and yes, J.K. Dobbins is a very injury-prone running back, RJ Harvey is going to take off. The one problem with that idea is the Broncos drafted Jonah Coleman in the 3rd round, and he profiles as a between-the-tackles running back who, presumably, if J.K. Dobbins goes down, or when, he would be the guy to take over those pure first 2 down rushing snaps, which would lead Harvey just with the pass catching role, which, yes, could be lucrative in a PPR league. I don't know if it's worth enough for me to want to take him at his current ADP, where he's going ahead of J.K. Dobbins, who I think will be more productive when healthy. And I just worry that he might not have as big of a role when J.K. Dobbins goes down, now that Jonah Coleman is also a Denver Bronco. And also, I think that there could just be a general shift in the Broncos offense to being more pass heavy and wanting to push the ball farther downfield. Now that Jalen Waddle's been brought in, and there could be a bigger emphasis on not checking the ball down to RJ Harvey every other play, like they did last year when the Denver Broncos offense sort of struggled with pushing the ball downfield and kind of relied on their defense to bail them out of a lot of situations. If they want to be a more explosive offense, I don't know if RJ Harvey's the guy for it, given his questionable running skills, his primarily pass down catching role. I just don't know if there is value with Harvey, even if J.K. Dobbins goes down. And we saw last year that there really isn't value with RJ Harvey if J.K. Dobbins is healthy. So I think I'm just out of on him as a player who is going to drastically exceed his draft day value.